Chapter 48:13. Enchanting was in a dilemma. He reached out to hold the little girl in his arms and sighed, "I'll come over in a while after I take a shower, okay?" No. She was still clinging to him, unwilling to let go. Enchanting closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his fingers gently touched her hair, slowly moved to her ears, and gently pulled. "Be good." Juan refused. Not only did she refuse, but she also pressed her little face against his chest and hugged him even tighter. Enchanting's heart was breaking down. He was always a man. But now, he couldn't leave her alone. After hesitating for a moment, he reached out and hugged her. They lay down together and hugged her, comforting her. At this time, not only her, but Enchanting himself also remembered that dark night. He let out a sigh and maintained this position, hugging her tightly. Probably because she could feel his body temperature, after a long time, Juan relaxed and leaned into his arms. Enchanting asked her softly, "What if there was a power outage at home in the past?" "I'll have backup power," she whispered. Her hot breath sprayed on his shirt and seeped into his skin. She felt that hugging and talking like this was particularly intimate. Although she often did this when she was a child, after all, they were very young at that time, and there was nothing wrong with it. But now she was a girl, and Enchanting was a mature man. This was wrong. At least, it shouldn't be like this. He also knew that she was afraid, but he let her be like this. It was his fault. Enchanting closed his eyes slightly. After a moment, he gave up struggling. On such a night, he hugged her, just like when she was a child. Outside, there was a storm, and inside the room, there was a trace of coldness. But Juan was warm. She curled up in his arms like a little animal, feeling very comfortable. In the middle of the night, she woke up in a daze and saw Enchanting when she opened her eyes. In the darkness, his eyes were open. Juan said in a daze, "You're not sleeping." "How?" he said helplessly. Juan arched, and in the end, the blanket covered him. She lay back down again and said with a sigh, "You're wearing clothes." This logic was really not bad. Enchanting let out a long sigh. He held her head in his big hand and stroked it gently. Juan said vaguely, "I won't tell anyone." He was both amused and angry. Did she really think that something would happen between me and Bayanin? Although he didn't deny that he had such a plan, at this stage, he and Bayanin were indeed nothing. Enchanting lowered his head and finally kissed her forehead. His voice was a little hoarse. "All right, let's sleep." "Oh," she replied obediently. She quickly fell asleep. How could Enchanting fall asleep so easily? The girl that he had longed for more than 10 years was in his arms. Just his mood alone was enough to make him excited. He held her in his arms until the rain stopped and the world returned to its original brightness. However, as he hugged her, he carefully turned off all the lights in the bedroom. He lowered his head and carefully pressed her in his arms. That night, there was a storm, but it seemed to be calm. Early in the morning, Juan woke up. Enchanting was no longer by her pillow. She sat up and realized that it was Enchanting's bed. The gray sheets and the pillow with his scent reminded her of last night. Chapter 48:14. Memorize. Thinking of last night, Juan buried her head. Enchanting spoke. She didn't want to see anyone. Just as she buried her face in the pillow, Enchanting appeared at the door. "Get up and eat breakfast. I think you won't be too free today. If you don't show up, the reporters won't let you off. I'll send you to the company after breakfast. PR or whatever, you know what to do." Juan turned over and lay flat on her back. She stared at the ceiling in a daze. After a while, she said softly, ever since I took over King Entertainment, there have been many crises in PR. But I never thought that one day, I would have to deal with my own personal affairs. Enchanting straightened up and said calmly, so this incident reminds us not to fall in love at such a young age. Huan jumped up immediately. You're the one in love at such a young age, you're the one in love at such a young age. Enchanting ignored her and went straight to the dining room. Hurry up, or you'll be late. The media will accuse you of being too sad. Her answer was to throw a pillow behind him, which hit Enchanting's waist. Enchanting turned and looked at her for a few seconds before bending over to pick up the pillow. He patted it and put it back on the bed. Huan bit her lip. He smiled. If you're not so sad, then get up and settle your own affairs. Wipe your PG clean before going abroad. Otherwise, you'll seem too useless. Huan harumphed and lifted the blanket to go to the bathroom. She had forgotten that she was in the master bedroom and naturally went in. Enchanting looked on quietly, and his eyes were dyed with a wisp of deep thought. When Huan came out, Enchanting was already in the dining room. She had changed into her own clothes and was sitting next to him. Enchanting was reading an English morning paper. He turned to look at her. Have some warm milk. She took a sip embarrassedly and looked at Enchanting. Are you going to King Entertainment? She felt that Enchanting cared a lot about anything that affected the market value of the stock. But Enchanting just glanced at her and said casually, you can handle such a small matter yourself. It's just a small matter. Huan sighed softly. Enchanting continued, don't drive these days. I'll drive you. Huan refused without thinking, aren't you very busy? I still have time to spare, he said calmly. Actually, he was right. The internal structure of the group was already very stable. They were busy only because of their ambitions. If they did not have such big ambitions, they would not be so busy. After Enchanting finished speaking, Huan looked at him while chewing on her bread, as if she was sizing him up. Hurry up and eat. He patted her hand, his voice indifferent. Huan suddenly said, I won't tell by Anan what happened last night. Enchanting looked up. He didn't seem to catch her point, but after a while, he roughly understood what she was talking about. He frowned and said, whatever. Huan was unhappy. She bit her lips and said, what do you mean by casual? You are too casual. Enchanting smiled slightly. What else? The smile on his face suddenly disappeared. He looked at her quietly and said, Qin Huan, did you really sleep with me last night just because you were afraid? Huan was stunned for a moment and looked straight at him. After a long while, Enchanting asked with a faint smile, just because you were afraid? This time, Huan answered him quickly, of course. Chapter 48:15. Enchanting's smile deepened and he didn't say anything else. He just took his jacket, changed his shoes, and sat on the sofa waiting for her. He had a lot of things to deal with. He called Secretary Wang on his phone while waiting for Huan. Huan was still in shock. Enchanting's casual words made her restless. How should she put it? It reminded her of the night when she was 18 years old. She had also shamelessly pestered Enchanting like this. At that time, Enchanting didn't have a girlfriend. Now, he had by Anan. She said she wouldn't say it, but was there any difference? Just like what Enchanting said, was she really just afraid? Or was it in her heart? She had always felt that Enchanting was hers. Regardless of whether she was with Yi Xiangnan or not, Enchanting should be hers. That was why she did that year. Huan was confused. She suddenly realized that she might have been wrong in the past. Now, she was wrong again, but it didn't seem wrong. That vague feeling was driving her crazy. Her gaze fell on Enchanting. He was sitting on the sofa. The sun shone in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was beautiful. And he was still handsome. She looked at him, feeling as if she had missed something. All these years, perhaps she had missed Enchanting. Back then, in Enchanting's eyes, her actions were so hateful. And last night, she was just relying on his care and his life in the Qin family. But what was she relying on now? Enchanting wanted to break away from the Qin family at any time and even control everything in the company. On the other hand, he had Baianin. What she was doing now seemed laughable. Yi Huan had never felt so embarrassed before. She lowered her eyes and bit her lip, not saying anything for a long time. Enchanting put his phone away and looked at her. Then, he smiled faintly. You don't seem like such a weak person. He got up and walked beside her. His slender and good-looking palm landed on her hair. Settle the matter properly. As for the rest, you can think about it. No one will force you. However, think about it carefully. Don't be as stupid as a pig. I'm not a pig. Yi Huan bit her lip. Have you ever seen a pig as beautiful as me? The common trait is stupidity. He said bluntly, you want to figure out something that you haven't figured out for more than 10 years? That's not very likely. Just take care of the things at hand. The subtext was, you and your ex-boyfriend have a clean separation, then come back to me. How could Yi Huan hear that? She was sad now. She looked up at Enchanting. Enchanting seemed to be very calm. At least, he was much calmer than her. She couldn't tell what he was thinking. She felt that he was implying something, but she also felt that she was overthinking things. Plus, Yi Xiangnan and Baianin. Therefore, the pig became lazy and didn't want to think about it anymore. Thinking about it gave him a headache. When she got into his car, Enchanting patted her head and said, Qin Yi Huan, you can't think it through for 2 years, can you? Ha! What 2 years? Enchanting buckled his seatbelt and said calmly, you've been in Italy for 2 years. You should be able to think and decide some things, right? That was a very obvious hint. It should be a clear hint. Her heart raced as she bit her lip and was at a loss. The world was really fantastical. Yesterday, she was still Yi Xiangnan's fiancée. But in less than a day, Enchanting was asking her for the results. No. She thought about it. Where's Baianin? Enchanting started the car and said calmly, she's not a pig. There's no way she can't find a man. He was calling her a pig again. My toothache is killing me. I'll fix it tomorrow. It should be updated at noon. Chapter 48:16. Memorize. Yi Huan glanced at him, her eyes misty. An indescribable feeling. Enchanting smiled and focused on driving. They arrived at Kain Entertainment at about 9:00 in the morning. Enchanting did not get out of the car, even though he knew that Yi Xiangnan would probably meet her today. It wasn't that he didn't care, but after so many years, he couldn't afford to care anymore. Besides, she was his now. Although he did not say it out loud, he knew that she would always be his. Ever since she was 18, everything had changed. She just didn't want to admit it. All these years, he had been angry because she had clearly liked him, but after that night, she had still chosen to be with Yi Xiannan. This was what Enchanting couldn't accept the most, and it was what he was especially angry about. But now, she was no longer Yi Xiangnan's. She was ignorant of his feelings, but he could feel that she was definitely not ignorant. The car stopped, and Enchanting leaned over to open the door for her. He smiled and said, I'll pick you up tonight. Yi Huan bit her lower lip. I might not be able to get off work on time. I'll take the company's car back. When she got out of the car, she suddenly turned around and bent down. What time are you coming home? Shenting's gaze fell on her face with some concentration. After a while, he smiled, 6 o'clock. After a pause, he said, I'll cook. Yi Huan said weakly, but I might not be able to get home on time for dinner. Go home, a faint smile appeared on Shenting's face. I'll wait for you. Yi Huan wanted to say something, but she swallowed her words in the end. Shenting smiled. Hurry up and go. The public relations department must be going crazy. Yesterday was just the beginning. Today was the day it would completely ferment. Shenting no longer doted on her like a child. He doted on her at home, but in King Entertainment, Yi Huan was the CEO. She couldn't hide behind him. Moreover, Shenting believed that she had such an ability. After he finished speaking, Yi Huan bit her lower lip and gently closed the door for him. Shenting glanced at her again as the black sports car slowly slid away. Qin Yi Huan turned her head. Secretary Lin was waiting for her. She sighed and said, President Qin, it's quite difficult. The Public Relations Department has arranged a press conference, and you need to attend it. Normal people can go everywhere to heal after breaking up, but I still have to explain to everyone. I don't know if it's me or them who have broken up. Yi Huan also sighed and walked straight to the elevator. He had been busy the whole day, and things were very troublesome. In the morning, King Entertainment's stock price had plummeted quite severely. They had held a press conference and announced it at the same time as Starlight. From now on, the two companies would still be in a cooperative relationship. Only then did the decline slow down. At noon, Yi Huan received a call from Yi Xiangnan. The two of them didn't speak for a long time. After about half a minute, Yi Xiangnan said softly, Do you want to have dinner together? Is this the last dinner? Yi Huan's voice was a little light. Yi Xiangnan hesitated for a few seconds before saying, You can say that. Yi Huan lowered her gaze and agreed. She set a time and place with him. They had broken up, but it was impossible for them to become enemies. For the sake of the company and the stock, they had to maintain a superficial relationship. Moreover, Yi Huan felt guilty, especially after last night. After hanging up, she played with her phone for a while, deleting all the photos of Yi Xiangnan. After deleting them, she was in a daze, feeling a little stifled. Chapter 48:17. After hanging up, she played with her phone for a while and deleted all the pictures of Yi Xiangnan. After deleting them, she was in a trance and felt a little suffocated. Secretary Lin brought her lunch and put it down gently. Seeing that Yi Huan was in a trance, Secretary Lin said softly, President Shen said that President Qin's health is not very good, so the food delivered to the mansion will be lighter these days. Yi Huan looked up and asked, Shenting. Secretary Lin nodded and looked puzzled. President Shen decides the food delivered to the mansion every day. Don't you know that, President Qin? Yi Huan was even more dazed. It took her a long time to come back to her senses. You mean President Shen decides the food every day? Secretary Lin said matter-of-factly, who else can it be? The old President Qin doesn't care about these things, but the young President Qin only likes to play with technology and doesn't care about the company's affairs. No one else but President Shen will worry about such trivial things. Yi Huan bit her lower lip and stared at the wooden lunch boxes in front of her. She said softly, You can leave first. She still couldn't digest this reality. Her relationship with Shenting had been stiff for many years, and he had been preparing lunch for her all these years. What kind of feelings did he have? Yi Huan didn't know, and she was a little afraid to find out. Perhaps it was because she was afraid of letting him down. Reaching out to open the lunch boxes, she looked at the dishes she liked. Her eyes were a little misty. All these years, she seemed to have been very capricious. She did what she wanted to do willfully and never considered Shinting's feelings. As she ate, she felt even more upset. At this moment, the phone in her hand rang. It was a WeChat message. It was Shinting's profile picture. Yi Huan opened it. He simply sent a few words. What do you want to eat tonight? I'll make it. She looked at these words carefully for a long time. Then, almost carefully, she typed, calm down, I'll be home around 8. Shinting only replied with one word. Perhaps he was really busy. Yi Huan quietly looked at those lines of words, feeling a little unreal. She had been back from abroad for a few days, and too many things had happened. She still couldn't wrap her head around it. She ate her food slowly. Usually, she would only eat half of it. But today, she had eaten the whole thing. Secretary Lin came over personally to clean it up and smiled. The news outside has been suppressed. The trending topic has been removed as well. They've arranged for Xiao Hua to be in a relationship. Qin Yi Huan nodded and didn't say anything. Secretary Lin continued, this time, we were actually implicated by Star Entertainment. The impact will be stopped soon, but Star Entertainment's problem is not small. President Qin, if CEO Yi asks for your cooperation today, you can't be too soft-hearted. Secretary Lin could be considered as a trusted aide, which was why he would say such considerate words. King Entertainment and Stars Entertainment were essentially entertainment companies. Now that something like this had happened, it was actually better to destroy the other party. Not only could they vent their anger, but they could also monopolize the industry. Qin Yi Huan tilted her head and looked at Secretary Lin. Of course, she knew that this was a great opportunity. She was hesitating. In fact, she didn't have such thoughts at first. After all, the two companies had been strategic partners all these years. Now that there was a loophole in Stars Entertainment, Yi Huan's eyes narrowed slightly. Secretary Lin knew her decision and immediately said seriously, I'll get someone to write a draft immediately. Once it's done, I'll let President Qin have a look. Chapter 48:18. Secretary Lin knew her decision and said seriously, I'll get someone to write a draft right away and let President Qin have a look after it. After all, they were ex-lovers. It was better not to be too ugly. However, Yi Huan raised her hand and said, no need. You guys can do as you see fit. Secretary Lin was surprised. Did she mean for them to do whatever they wanted? However, this was also unexpected. This was President Qin's style. Secretary Lin quickly retreated. Yi Huan was still sitting quietly as she looked at Shinting's message again. At 6:00 in the evening, she got into the driver's car and went to a famous Western restaurant. When she arrived, Yi Xiangnan was already waiting for her. Yi Huan walked over and sat down opposite him. Yi Xiangnan glanced at the waiter, who immediately poured a glass of aperitif. Yi Huan took off her coat and put it on the back of the chair. She smiled lightly and said, I haven't been feeling well recently, so I can't drink. Yi Xiangnan looked at her deeply and moved her aperitif to his side. He held it with his slender fingers and took a sip. He said softly, How are you? Yi Huan let out a long breath and said, I'm fine. How about you? He put down the slender goblet in his hand and smiled faintly. Do you think I'll be fine? Yi Huan looked down and said, I'm sorry. I've touched a sore spot for you. Yi Xiangnan reached out and grabbed her hand. Yi Huan was shocked and wanted to pull her hand away, but Yi Xiangnan was too strong. He held her hand almost stubbornly, his voice low and husky as hell. He said in a low voice, "Do you know why none of us made it to the end?" Yi Huan looked into his eyes. Yi Xiangnan did not care about other people's gazes. He held her hand and said in a low voice, "I'm not looking for an excuse. It's just that many years ago, we were different." Yi Huan blinked her eyes gently. Yi Xiangnan laughed a little self-deprecatingly. "Yi Huan, which part of me is inferior to him?" Was he referring to Shenting? Yi Huan did not ask, but she knew in her heart that he was talking about Shenting. Her lips moved slightly. Yi Xiangnan stopped her. "Don't tell me it's not true. Yi Huan, you can deceive others, but you can't deceive yourself." Yi Xiannan finally let go of her and leaned against the back of the chair. She sighed as she said, "I don't know when it started, but you've been talking about Shenting and Shenting. Yi Huan, you're not wrong. You're just too slow. And Shenting should also know about it." He just waited patiently. Perhaps it was because he had the same pride as him that he kept waiting. So did he. So the three of them had wasted so many years, and now they were finally free. In this incident, the one who suffered the most was not Yi Huan, but him, Yi Xiannan. No one could know what he was thinking, nor could they understand his feelings. He was about to marry a woman he didn't like, understand, or know. Otherwise, his child would be an illegitimate child, which was not allowed in the Yi family. But he really liked Yi Huan. He used to like her very much, but later, he didn't dare to love her. Because he knew that she would belong to someone else sooner or later. Yi Xiangnan said so much, but Yi Huan just smiled. Then she looked straight at him. "Yi Xiangnan, if you think I like someone else, I've been with you all the time. You haven't tried to make me like you." She stared at him, and her eyes were a little misty. Chapter 48:19. She stared at him, her eyes misting up. He and Shenting both said that they liked her and that they loved her, but she also wanted a certain amount of love and affection. She wasn't an object that could be made do with. She didn't know what was wrong between them, but she wasn't the only one who was the problem. She wouldn't take the blame. After she said that, Yi Xiangnan was stunned. After a long time, he smiled bitterly. "It's my fault." Yes, it was his fault. They had been together for so many years, but he had never thought about making it up. Instead, he watched her unhappy. He was even more despicable than Shenting. That man. Yi Huan let him down, but he let Yi Huan down. Yi Xiangnan finally understood that it wasn't that she had left, but that he had lost her. His throat tightened. There were many things he wanted to say, but in the end, he couldn't say a word. He could only eat quietly with her. Yi Huan lowered her head and looked at the steak on the plate. She said softly, "I won't be too gentle with Star's entertainment in the future." Yi Xiannan seemed taken aback, but when he looked up, he smiled again in an obvious manner. He said softly, as expected. "That's you." Yi Huan took a sip of the soup and said softly, "Thank you for understanding." Yi Xiangnan's eyes always had a look of longing. He still remembered how she was when she was young. She would always follow behind him and call him Big Brother Xiangnan. When she grew up, she wouldn't call him that. He thought that he had always liked her, but she didn't like him. It was Shenting, the man who had always been by her side. Yi Xiangnan let out a long breath. "Why aren't you eating? Don't you have an appetite?" "I don't really have an appetite. I'll get the auntie to cook something light when we get back." Yi Huan smiled and said nonchalantly. But she still accompanied him to finish dinner, although she did not eat much. When they were leaving, Yi Xiangnan offered to give her a ride. Yi Huan shook her head and refused. The driver is waiting for me. She looked at him and whispered, "Take care." This was the best way for her to end their relationship. There were no tears or curses. It was not because she was gentlemanly, but because they had stopped loving each other a long time ago. If they didn't love each other, there was no need to tie each other down. When Yi Huan got in the car, Yi Xiangnan suddenly stopped her. "Yi Huan." She paused, then turned her head and looked at him. Yi Xiangnan smiled faintly. "You're living with Shinting now, right?" Yi Huan was stunned. After a while, she smiled and didn't deny it. This time, she did not deny it. She was herself for once. As for whether Yi Xiangnan would tell Bai Anan and whether Bai Anan would cause trouble for Shinting, that was Shinting's business. Since he wanted her to live with him, he was prepared for Bai Anan to know. Yi Huan suddenly thought that maybe she was just maturing now. She would not ask about him and Bai Anan. He said 2 years to let her understand everything. She thought that 2 years was also what she wanted to give him. If he couldn't bear to be with Bai Anan in these 2 years, she would give him her blessings. Yi Huan smiled and took a step back. "Brother Xiangnan, take care." On such a late autumn night, Yi Xiangnan's eyes were a little moist. He couldn't help going forward and hugging her. "You too." After all, they had grown up together. This hug made him realize that he still loved her. Chapter 48:20. After all, they had grown up together. After this hug, he realized that he still loved her. But his pride let her go. He had so many years to use. If only he had treated her better and put in more effort, he would not have thrown her away. Just as they were hugging, there was a flash somewhere. It was obvious that someone had taken a photo. Yi Xiangnan turned his head, but he did not find the person who had taken the photo. Yi Huan shook her head. Forget it. Because even if it was exposed, she would say that it was a previous photo and deny it. Yi Xiangnan could guess what she was thinking. He shook his head and looked at her deeply. "Let's go back." There was someone waiting for her. Yi Huan got into the car. The driver asked her if she was going to the apartment or the villa. Yi Huan told him Shinting's address. The driver was surprised. He knew that it was where young Master Shen lived. Was Missy going to live together? Yi Huan sensed his thoughts and snorted. "Uncle Firewood, what are you thinking?" "Shinting is my brother." Uncle Firewood laughed. "Yes, he is a good brother. But young Master is already over 30. It's time for him to start a family. His career is already so good. He can't be busy with work all day." Yi Huan felt that there was a hidden meaning in his words. But she could not refute him at the same time. She only snorted. Uncle Firewood stopped while he was ahead. He just kept laughing. When the car stopped at Shinting's apartment, there was a person standing in the hall. It was none other than Shinting. Uncle Firewood laughed even more happily. When he opened the door, he joked, "If you stick to your brother like this, he won't be able to find a wife." Yi Huan glared at Uncle Firewood, but Uncle Firewood didn't mind. He nodded at Shinting as a form of greeting and left. Yi Huan stood there. Seeing Shinting come over, she snorted. "Uncle Firewood, you are good at pretending." Shinting was wearing a set of home clothes and was clean. He must have taken a shower. He stood next to her and watched the black car drive away. "What did he do to you?" He looked so unhappy. Yi Huan glanced at him and said naturally, "He said it's my fault that you can't find a wife." Shinting glanced at her again and walked towards the elevator. Yi Huan followed beside him. "I haven't done anything for the past few years. Once isn't enough." He stopped in front of the elevator and suddenly turned around. Yi Huan was startled and her body involuntarily retreated. However, she retreated too quickly and was about to hit the wall. Enchanting reached out and hooked her back, but the result was that their bodies were stuck together. She tried to break free, but he didn't let her. He trapped her at the elevator door, holding her tightly. Yi Huan bit her lower lip. Enchanting, are you crazy? Let go of me. He didn't let go and just stared at her from above. Yi Huan kicked him a little rudely. Don't forget that you have a girlfriend. He sneered. Is this the reason you had a meal with Yi Xiangnan? Yi Huan was stunned. She only spoke after a while. How did you know? This was no different from admitting it. She thought for a moment and said, it's Uncle Firewood. He must be the one who snitched on me. Traitor. Rotten to the core. Enchanting's voice was indifferent. I can guess it even if Uncle Firewood didn't say it. With that said, he pressed the button for the elevator. Yi Huan didn't realize that he had successfully changed the topic. After entering the elevator, he quickly let go of her and Yi Huan naturally rolled to the other side. Chapter 48-21. Enchanting's voice was indifferent. I can guess it even if Uncle Firewood doesn't say it. With that, he pressed the elevator button. Yi Huan didn't notice that he had successfully changed the topic. After entering the elevator, he quickly let go of her, and Yi Huan naturally rolled to the other side. The atmosphere was a little subtle. At least, she was embarrassed. She flipped her hair and said uncomfortably, well, we just have something to talk about. I don't want you to explain. Enchanting smiled gently. You don't need to explain to me. If I have to be jealous of this, I would have died of jealousy all these years. What? What jealousy? What did he say? Yi Huan bit her lower lip and refused to accept this information. Enchanting didn't say anything more. At this time, the elevator arrived. He took her back to his apartment. Yi Huan felt uncomfortable. When she changed her slippers, she asked him, why are you waiting downstairs? Nothing, it's convenient. He said with a smile. Then he led the way to the dining room. Okay, let's eat. Yi Huan followed behind and cleared her throat. Actually, I'm quite full. I'll just eat something casually. She said it firmly, but her stomach failed to live up to her expectations. It was very embarrassing. Enchanting smiled. Didn't Yi Xiangnan let you have a good meal? He said it gently, but there was a touch of undetectable heartache in his tone. If it was in the past, Yi Huan would never have heard it. But after what happened at noon, she was very sensitive to it. She sat down, ate a mouthful of rice, and secretly looked at the dishes in front of her. Then she said in a low voice, I have no appetite after eating the steak. Doesn't he know that you're not in good health? Enchanting said casually. Yi Huan was stunned for a moment. She instinctively said, he doesn't know. Enchanting stared at her. He knows. Therefore, this was why Yi Xiangnan and Qin Yi Huan couldn't go to the end. If they didn't care about each other sincerely, how could they be called lovers? Even if it was the last meal, if Yi Xiangnan had been concerned about her, he would have known that she couldn't eat Western food. In the end, it was still not suitable. Yi Huan was someone who needed someone to take good care of her. Obviously, Yi Xiangnan wasn't that person. Enchanting didn't say much. He helped her put some food in her bowl. In the future, if you're hungry, find something to eat. If you have an important social engagement, if you don't want to stay, just come back, okay? She just looked straight at him. You're like teaching a child. Aren't you? He smiled. You're holding a milk bottle. If you're not a child, what are you? I'm not. She wanted to explain, but in the end, she felt that there was no need to explain to Enchanting. In the end, she buried her head in the food. Eating the delicious food, she was in a good mood. It seemed that she hadn't eaten Enchanting's cooking for a long time. His cooking had always been good, and it was for her own good. Now, she thought that if he married someone else one day, she would be at a disadvantage. What are you thinking about? Enchanting knocked on her forehead. Eat your food. Your blood test is not up to standard. What will you do if you go to Italy? Can I bring the chef over? She raised her head, her eyes seemed to be filled with stars. Enchanting smiled. The chef might have a lot of things to do. By the way, didn't you say that you have a girlfriend? I'm not talking about you. Huan buried her head. Don't flatter yourself. Chapter 48:22. Can I bring the chef over? She raised her head, her eyes seemed to be filled with stars. Enchanting smiled. The chef might have a lot of things to do. By the way, didn't you say that you have a girlfriend? I'm talking about you, not you. Huan buried her head. Don't flatter yourself. Enchanting smiled and ate quietly. He didn't eat much, and most of the time, he was serving food for her. Huan ate until she was a little full. She rubbed her stomach and smiled at Enchanting embarrassedly. Enchanting also looked at her quietly. After a while, he smiled. Go watch TV when you're full. I'll clean up. Huan was a little embarrassed. Let me do it. She was embarrassed to let Enchanting do everything. It seemed like he was the one taking care of her, and it wasn't good. Enchanting looked at her and actually agreed. I happen to have a few plans that I want to look at. Thank you for your hard work. Huan made a face at him and then began to clean up. Where should she start? She bit her lower lip and secretly looked at Enchanting. Enchanting was buried in work. He was still on the sofa in the living room instead of going to the study. She had peeked into his study room, and she had clearly said so generously. Thinking about it, she put it back to the work at hand. Huan, who had never done any housework, carried the plates into the kitchen one by one. She didn't want the rest of the dishes, so she threw them away and put on an apron. It was a pink apron. She didn't know why he had a pink apron here. But Enchanting knew that he bought it last time when he went to the home store. At that time, he didn't expect her to do housework. In fact, he ate out most of the time. If he ate at home, there would be a part-time helper, but no one would come these days. He chose to cook for her himself. Enchanting could see the kitchen from where he was sitting. He happened to see Huan standing in front of the counter in a small apron. She looked like a little wife handling the household chores. He stared at it for a while, smiled faintly, and continued to immerse himself in his work. Huan, on the other hand, was struggling with those plates. Actually, there was a dishwasher, but she didn't know how to do it, so she washed them by hand. Wearing gloves, it was slippery, and soon, the plates in her hands fell to the ground. After a crisp sound, a small cut appeared on her calf, and a little blood seeped out. With her constitution, she was prone to bleeding. Even the slightest wound could cause her to bleed profusely. Huan frowned as she stared at it. She didn't know what to do. At this moment, Enchanting came over. He looked at her and quickly squatted down. No one dared to touch it for fear of getting infected. Go to the living room, I'll help you deal with it. If it doesn't work, you'll have to go to the hospital, he said firmly. Huan let out an "aw," but he had already picked her up. Afraid that she would fall, she instinctively hugged his neck. But she felt that it was inappropriate to hug him, and it was even more abrupt to put him down. Hence, she clenched her fists helplessly. Enchanting glanced at her and didn't say anything more. He hurried to the living room and put her down on the sofa. He swept the documents to the side, not caring about them at all. Yi-Hwan bit her lip and watched as he went to get the first aid kit and came back quickly. He was still squatting down, holding her calf with one hand and looking up at her. "It's a little painful, bear with it." "Oh," she replied. "Be gentle." Chapter 48-23. But no matter how gentle he was, she still felt the pain, the kind that tears were about to come out. But no matter how gentle he was, she still felt a lot of pain, the kind that was about to burst into tears. Yi-Hwan was really holding it in. Her pain threshold was very low to begin with, but now it really hurt, and she was afraid of blood. Enchanting put her foot on his knee. She immediately retracted her foot, but Enchanting caught it. "Don't move. Don't move," he said gently and softly again, then looked at her. "Observe for a while. If the blood is still flowing, I'll take you to the hospital." Yi-Hwan was quite afraid. She was quite afraid every time she bled, afraid that her blood would run out. This time, she was also afraid, but she didn't know why. Because Enchanting was there, she wasn't so afraid anymore. Even when she went to the hospital, he accompanied her. Later, he put her foot on the sofa and sat beside her. Yi-Hwan leaned her head on his shoulder, but her foot was still on his knee. "Will I die? What nonsense are you talking about?" Enchanting was a little speechless. "Don't talk nonsense." At this moment, Yi-Hwan was indescribably fragile. She leaned on his shoulder. "I don't know how many times I've changed my blood since I was young, and I don't know how many people's blood I've had. It's not good." Enchanting's eyes darkened, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Yi-Hwan bit her lip and stared at her leg. After a while, she said softly, "It's bleeding again." Enchanting saw it too. He reached out and touched her little head, then said softly, "I'll take you to the hospital." She grabbed his arm. "Enchanting." He lowered his head and smiled. "I'm here, don't be afraid." Yi-Hwan smiled lightly. "I'm not afraid." She just felt that it was strange that they had to go to the hospital so soon after they resumed their previous relationship. Enchanting didn't think too much about it. He took the jacket and put it on for her. It was a little cold outside, so Enchanting buttoned it up one button at a time. After putting it on, Yi-Hwan realized that the jacket was Enchanting's. She paused for a moment. "These are your clothes. Wear it. It can block the wind." Enchanting was wearing home clothes, but he could still go out. Just like that, he carried her out until they reached the car downstairs. The air conditioner in the car was turned on. She wanted to take off her coat, but Enchanting shook his head. "We'll be there soon. Put it on." He looked down and then back at her face. "Don't look down later." Yi-Hwan exclaimed again, "Why?" She didn't know why, but she was bleeding so fast that the gauze was completely red. Enchanting started the car and drove a little fast. They arrived at the hospital in less than 10 minutes. During the whole process, Yi-Hwan did not speak. When the car stopped, she whispered, "I feel a little dizzy." It was because he had lost too much blood. She was very obedient and did not look down. Enchanting reached out and gently pinched her cheek. "Good girl." With that said, he quickly opened the car door and got out of the car. He opened the door from her side and carried her up. His expression was very calm, but when he carried her, he walked very fast. His feet almost didn't touch the ground. When they arrived at the emergency room, they showed the card. The doctor quickly found blood from the blood bank and gave it to Yi Huan. Yi Huan lay on the hospital bed, her face a little pale. Shenting accompanied her, his fingers intertwined with hers. His voice was very soft. "Sleep. It'll be good when you wake up." Yi Huan's eyes were wide open. She shook her head. "No, I don't want to sleep." Chapter 48-24. Because she was afraid that she wouldn't wake up if she fell asleep. Every time she received a blood transfusion, she would fall asleep and never wake up again. Shenting's voice became softer and gentler. "I will always be here with you. Be good and close your eyes." At this moment, his expression was extremely doting, just like when she was young and he would coax her to sleep every night. Yi Huan's eyes were a little dazed. Then, she gently leaned her head on his arm, like a cute little animal, and said softly, "I can't bear to." Shenting was overjoyed to hear that. He knew what she meant, but he restrained himself. He shouldn't be so fast, at least not at this time. In 2 years, if she didn't change her mind, they would get married immediately. Perhaps, in his heart, he was afraid that she would regret it and leave him again. If he couldn't bear it, he would really hate her and not give up, but he would use all kinds of means to make her belong to him from then on. She wouldn't like that. Shenting's fingers gently stroked her fluffy hair, comforting her bit by bit. Under his comfort, Yi Huan fell asleep. She slept soundly and deeply, as if her whole body had been injected with new energy. Her whole body was warm. It was indescribably comfortable. Shenting's gaze was very warm. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss the little girl. Then, he couldn't help but kiss her forehead. At this time, the doctor came in and coughed lightly. "Mr. Shen, there is not enough blood in the blood bank. Do you want to draw mine?" Shenting said calmly. The doctor nodded. Shenting had drawn 300 this time, and only used 100. The rest was still in the blood bank for backup. In the middle of the night, Shenting was also tired, and in the end, he slept beside her. He lay there, unable to sleep because the lights were on. But Yi Huan was afraid of the dark, so he accommodated her. They hugged each other like this until 4 in the morning, when he felt a little sleepy. It was a deep sleep. When Yi Huan woke up, it was 8:00 in the morning. The nurse came to clean up. Seeing her awake, she greeted her with a smile. "Miss Qin, are you awake?" Yi Huan scratched her head and sat up. She looked at Shenting and felt a little uncomfortable. "President Shen, are you going to sleep here for the night?" The nurse smiled. "No, Mr. Shen stayed up for the first half of the night and went to draw blood again in the middle of the night. By the way, Mr. Shen treats Miss Qin really well. He draws blood almost once a month and puts it in the blood bank. Almost all the blood Miss Qin uses is donated by Mr. Shen." Yi Huan was stunned. It was all Shenting's blood. All these years, she had used so much blood. Just as she was about to ask, the nurse continued, "Even when Mr. Shen was abroad for a few years, he would fly back once every 2 months to prepare blood for Miss Qin." Yi Huan was completely stunned. She knew how busy Shenting had been living abroad for the past few years. It had been like a devil's training, but he had flown back every 2 months to draw her blood. He clearly didn't need to do so. She didn't know what to say. At this moment, Shenting woke up. The nurse glanced at him and immediately left with the things. The door was closed, but the atmosphere in the ward was quite subtle. Yi Huan was the first to speak and asked in a low voice, "Is what she said true?" Actually, she knew that she was asking too much. It must be true. Shenting didn't answer her question directly, but asked her softly, "Are you hungry?" Chapter 48-25. Updated quickly. Actually, she knew that she was asking too much, and it had to be true. Enchanting didn't answer her question directly, but asked her softly, "Are you hungry?" Huan stared at his face and bit her lip. What's the difference?" Enchanting smiled. "Isn't it normal? If it were someone else, they would have done the same." As soon as he finished speaking, he was hugged by a pair of slender arms. Huan buried her face in his chest and said softly, "It's different. She might not want it if it was made by someone else." Enchanting lowered his head and said hoarsely, "What's different? Tell me." She shook her head again and refused to tell him. Enchanting smiled and didn't force her. He just reached out and touched her hair lovingly. "All right, I'll go make breakfast for you. I want to eat what you make." Eperhaps it was because she was injured, but she was especially soft and clingy. She simply stuck to his chest and refused to come out. Enchanting couldn't bring himself to say that he had a girlfriend anymore. Even if he said it, it wouldn't be convincing. Because the fact that he brought her to live in his house said it all. Enchanting wasn't someone without principles. He brought her back even though he had a girlfriend. Actually, she knew that Baianan was just an excuse for the other party. That way, it wouldn't be so awkward for them to get along. Enchanting patted her little head. "All right, I'll do it." Satisfied, she let go of him and sat on the bed. Was it because she was injured? At this moment, her phone rang. She picked it up and saw that it was Secretary Lin calling to ask about what they had talked about yesterday. As the chief secretary, she had to ask again about the matter of trampling on Star's entertainment. Huan said it briefly. However, Enchanting could understand what she was trying to say. He just smiled and didn't say anything, continuing to make breakfast in the small kitchen of the VIP ward. Huan bit her lower lip. "Enchanting, Yi Xiangnan and I were photographed last night." Enchanting's fingers paused and he looked at her. Huan felt guilty and whispered, "Actually, it's nothing. I won't admit it." He continued to work, but after a while, he asked her, "Are you trying to explain to me?" He asked in a serious manner, and Huan answered in a serious manner as well. "Sort of." Enchanting did not say anything else. Huan's heart was in a mess when he did not speak. She bit her lower lip. "Enchanting." He stewed the porridge and turned around. "If you have to ask me, my answer is that I'm angry, but I won't lash out because of it. Because it was something that she and Yi Xiangnan hadn't handled well." Huan shouted, "Why are you so generous?" Enchanting sighed softly. "Then how do you want me to express my anger? Should I turn around and leave or not make breakfast for you?" Huan didn't say anything. She hugged her knees and said after a long time, "Xiangnan said it was because of me." "I know." Enchanting smiled. "It's because you're too stupid." Huan glared at him. Seriously, she couldn't even quarrel with him. But she didn't know that this was Enchanting's line of demarcation. If she dared to be ambiguous with anyone in the future, his emotions would flare up for her to see. Huan looked at him with some bitterness. After a while, she suddenly said, "Someone took a picture of me being hospitalized last night, and it's irrefutable evidence that we lived together. Someone even said, we came to the hospital last night because. Chapter 48-26. Memorized from her expression, Enchanting could guess what she wanted to say. He looked at her and chuckled. "Because of what?" Huan whispered. Enchanting raised his eyebrows, looking surprised and amused. "Am I that cruel?" Huan blushed. After a while, she snorted, "How would I know?" Enchanting's smile deepened. If you don't know, then who does? Yi Huan widened her eyes and stared at him. Shinting just smiled and went back to the kitchen. Soon, he had prepared breakfast. It was light and sweet. Yi Huan sniffed. Oh, I think I'm hungry. Shinting smiled and put the breakfast on the small dining table. Yi Huan wanted to get off the bed, but he stopped her. Don't move, I'll carry you over. She sat at the head of the bed, her feet swinging gently. I'm fine now. Shinting's gaze landed on the bandage on her calf and he smiled faintly. Yes, but the doctor said that it's best not to walk around today. Still, he picked her up. Yi Huan opened her eyes wide and stared at him. But I have to go to the company today. I still have something to deal with. As she spoke, her arms hooked around his neck. Shinting said without thinking, if there's anything, ask Secretary Lin to come over. You don't even have the right to stay in the hospital when you're injured. If they were this busy, King Entertainment's performance would have long surpassed Star's Entertainment's. All these years, he had been working on other areas. Starlight was still focusing on the entertainment industry and was already one of the top 5 entertainment companies in the world. This was all thanks to Yi Xiangnan's hard work, while King Entertainment had shrunk in this area. Yi Huan wanted to say something, but she shut her mouth. After all, it was true that she had not made any achievements after taking over, so she had no position to stand on. Shinting looked at her, placed her on the dining chair, and scooped a bowl of porridge for her. Yi Huan took 2 bites and suddenly looked up to ask him, Are you going to the company today? Of course, Shinting said softly. For some reason, Yi Huan felt a sense of loss in her heart. It was an indescribable feeling. She lowered her head and made a sound of acknowledgement, but didn't say anything else. Shinting tilted his head and looked at her. He probably knew that she was unhappy, so he smiled lightly and said, There's an important meeting at the company today. Was that an explanation? Yi Huan also knew that she seemed to be too unreasonable. She looked up at him and said, You don't have to accompany me. I can do it myself. Shinting smiled faintly and did not say anything else. After finishing his breakfast, he informed the doctor and nurses before heading to the company. Outside, it was still a bloodbath. Especially since he and Yi Huan had been photographed by the reporters, coupled with the sudden situation last night, it was hard not to think about it. There were over 100 reporters below King Group. Shinting got out of the car and walked to the lobby on the first floor under the escort of the security guards. The reporters kept asking him about his relationship with Yi Huan. Shinting was at the top of the stairs. He turned his head and said with a hint of warmth in his indifferent expression, Yi Huan is my family. These 2 words were actually a little warm and ambiguous. They could advance or retreat at any time. The reporters weren't idiots. Of course they could tell. But even though they could tell, they didn't dare to write carelessly. President Shen wasn't someone to be trifled with. His temper was even worse. Hence, for a long time, no one dared to make a sound. Shinting glanced around and entered the building. Bai Anan was 30 years old this year, the same age as Yi Xiangnan. She was usually indifferent, but she was actually a smiling tiger just like Shinting. Qin Xian hated women like her the most. Moreover, it was a woman older than him. At this time, he took a look at her. Sure enough, she was still acting as if nothing had happened when she was heartbroken. She was indeed made of iron. Qin Xian was not interested in women, so he just took a look at her. However, Bai Anan took another look at him and then narrowed her eyes. Shinting did not want her, and even Qin Xian, the unscrupulous businessman, dared to look down on her. She knew in her heart that he must be thinking that she was an old woman who could not get married at 30 years old. Bai Ainin gritted her teeth. Qin Xian probably felt it, so he looked up and looked at her. Then, he raised his eyebrows and mouthed silently, "It's exactly what you think." Chapter 48-28. Bai Ainin was about to explode. Qin Xian was extremely delicate and looked like a rich young master. Just a slight smile was enough to drive Bai Ainin mad again. Enchanting was presiding over the meeting. Their exchange of glances didn't escape his eyes. Enchanting didn't say anything, but he frowned slightly. After the meeting, Enchanting left first. It was still not too late for him to rush to the hospital for lunch. Secretary Wang had already asked the villa's chauffeur to deliver the food. Yi Huan should have known he would be there when she saw the 2 lunch boxes. After Enchanting left, the middle and upper management were discussing. It seems like there wasn't a conclusion in today's meeting. President Shen actually left just like that. There's no additional meeting in the afternoon. Yes, President Shen must have gone to see. Bai Ainin picked up her briefcase and walked out as if she hadn't heard anything. When she reached the elevator, Qin Xian was in the same elevator as her. He leaned against the side of the elevator and said calmly, "Actually, it's not a big deal to fall out of love, but it's not good to force yourself. If you want to cry, just cry. What's so good about acting like a strong woman all day long? Isn't it too tiring?" Bai Ainin stood up straight. "Thank you for classifying me as a female, Mr. Qin. You have no confidence." Qin Xian smiled. "I thought you were as confident as Yi Xiangnan." Indeed, the Yi family's 2 sons were both heavens players. They were arrogant and it was normal for them to think that they were especially powerful. However, it was also true that they had suffered setbacks in their relationships. How could anyone not vomit blood when they saw each other as a pair? Now, Bai Ainin was a little envious that Yi Xiangnan had a wife to torture. What else could she do other than work? Bai Ainin snorted coldly. "It's none of your business." She looked at Qin Xian suspiciously. "By the way, Mr. Qin is a tech upstart. Logically speaking, he should be quite clean, but I seem to have heard some bad rumors." If Enchanting was a hidden knife in his smile, then Mr. Qin was the kind who didn't even bother to smile. He was so despicable that it was shameful. There were 3 evil people in this generation of the Qin family, including Qin Yi Huan. Didn't she give Stars Light a hard slap this morning? Now, Xiangnan was cleaning up the mess. After Bai Ainin finished, Qin Xian smiled faintly. "Lawyer Bai, if I remember correctly, you are our company's special lawyer. The contract expires next week and I won't be taking over. So, young Master Qin, we might meet in court in the future." Bai Ainin gently poked his heart with her finger and sneered, "Move aside, the elevator door is open." Qin Xian moved to the side and smirked. "That's right, Lawyer Bai will rush back to cry." Bai Xian turned and stared at and Qin. And looked at Qin. Qin Xian's smile turned into a smile as he looked at her. His gaze was bottomless. Bai Ainin snorted. "You're crazy." She left quickly. Qin Xian's gaze followed her. After a while, he turned and returned to his office. Secretary Wang came over and said softly, "President Qin, Mr. Shen said that he won't be coming back to the company in the afternoon. You will be in charge of the morning meeting." "I knew it." Qin Xian's voice was indifferent. "He's a workaholic. He won't let his subordinates off." But he was in love. Chapter 48-29. Secretary Wang came over and said softly, President Qin, CEO Shen said that he won't be coming back to the office in the afternoon. You'll be in charge of the meeting in the afternoon. I knew it. Qin Xian's voice was indifferent. He's a workaholic. He won't let his subordinates off. Qin Xian leaned back in his chair and looked at Secretary Wang. Is love really so addictive? He was a workaholic, but he couldn't wait to fall in love. Secretary Wang pushed his glasses up and opened Baidu. Then, he said professionally, when humans fall in love, they produce a substance called dopamine. All right, it's not biology class. Qin Xian's teeth hurt when he heard that. He sighed. All right, Secretary Wang, you can leave now. Secretary Wang was about to leave, but he paused. Oh yeah, actually, Lawyer Bai has a good personality. Won't President Qin consider her? Qin Xian frowned. Good. She's the same as CEO Shen. Will she be good? Secretary Wang smiled again. But President Qin likes to get along with CEO Shen. I thought they would get along better this way. Would they? Qin Xian just thought about Bai Ainan's indifference and let it go. He might prefer petite and cute girls, like Yi Hui. Yi Xiangnan's sister. However, he wasn't moved to the point where he had to date her, so he never took action. Qin Xian thought that he would probably remain unmarried for the rest of his life. He wasn't impulsive enough to want to spend the rest of his life with a woman. Secretary Wang saw his expression and sighed. Young Master Qin was 28 years old and had never been in love before. He didn't seem to be moved by any girl either. Could there be something wrong with him? That was why she used Lawyer Bai to test him. She really suspected that young President Qin and CEO Shen, he didn't dare to think about it anymore. It would be a sin to think about it. Secretary Wang left. Qin Xian turned on the computer and entered a few commands. However, when he looked closely, he realized that it was Bai Ainan's Baidu encyclopedia. He frowned. What the hell is this? But once he opened it, he would always take a look. With just a glance, all he could remember was a long list of titles, all kinds of excellence, and the fact that she was really 30 years old. Qin Xian closed his notebook. He had no interest in women older than himself. Anyone older than 25 would be called an old woman. On the other side, Bai Ainan sneezed for no reason. She held on to the steering wheel and wiped it with a tissue. He let out a long sigh and called Yi Hui. Do you have time to come out for a drink tonight? Yi Fenghui stuck out her tongue. The house is too messy next time, and you'll understand. This is. Bai Ainan threw down the phone. There's no one to accompany you even if you're heartbroken. Actually, it wasn't that bad. After all, she already knew that Shenting didn't have any feelings for her. But she still faintly liked him and waited. Sure enough, men were all bastards. Bai Ainan drove directly to a clubhouse bar. After drinking for the whole afternoon, he wasn't too drunk, but he wasn't that sober either. She did something that wasn't sober and rational. She called Shenting and gave him a good scolding. She scolded him in whatever unpleasant words she said. She just wanted to vent her anger. She wouldn't cry. She chose to scold this bastard. Shenting was quite helpless, but at the same time, he was gentle. He asked where she was, then told her to wait there, while he dialed Qin Xian's number. Go pick up Bai Ainan and send her home. Chapter 48:30. Shenting hung up the phone and looked at Yi Huan. Yi Huan stared at him. He sighed and said, I know what you'll say. But it's definitely not what you think. Yi Huan leaned against the headboard and stared at Shinting for a while. She whispered, "Have you kissed her?" Shinting didn't answer directly. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and reached out to touch her face gently. "Are you sure you want to know?" Yi Huan stared at him for a long time and gave up after thinking for a long time. Shinting was right. It might not be a good thing for her to know. Moreover, her woman's intuition told her that it was better for her not to know. She stopped asking and picked up her phone to play games for a while. She thought that Shinting would always preach to her, such as patients need to rest or something, but he really didn't say anything. He just sat on the sofa to deal with his work. After a long time, Yi Huan finally couldn't help but say, "Shinting." He looked up and said, "What's wrong? Do you want some water? I'll get it for you." She didn't say anything and just looked at him. Shinting smiled knowingly and said, "So you need to go to the bathroom." He was about to hug her, but Yi Huan stopped him. "No, I don't want that. If you're very busy, you don't have to accompany me." Shinting smiled faintly and buried himself in work again. "It's the same here and in the company." How was it the same? There was a secretary in the company and it was comfortable at home. Anything was better than the hospital, wasn't it? But since he said that, Yi Huan couldn't say anything else. She played games for a while and then felt bored, so she put down the game and looked at him. It seemed that it had been a long time since she looked at him so closely and seriously. Shinting was very good-looking. He used to be gentle, but he seemed to have become a lot stricter in recent years. Yi Huan thought that it was probably lonely at the top. Thinking about it, she asked in a very soft voice, "Have you ever regretted it?" When she asked, her body naturally leaned towards the side of the bed, closer to Shinting. Shinting put down his work and smiled. "What's wrong?" Yi Huan also smiled faintly. "It's nothing. I just feel that it's very tiring, so I'm asking if you regret it." Shinting simply closed the notebook and put it aside. Then, he looked at Yi Huan with a serious expression. "You suddenly asked." Yi Huan remained silent. Shinting smiled faintly. "Actually, I don't think it's hard. All ambitious men live like this." If he hadn't come to the Qin family, he might have had to take more detours and struggle less for at least 50 years. Thinking about it this way, didn't it make sense? However, he wouldn't tell Yi Huan about this. He was telling the truth when he said that it wasn't hard. Hearing him say that it wasn't hard, Yi Huan grabbed his arm and whispered, "Really?" Shinting smiled. "Yes." Yi Huan felt a little better, but she still didn't believe it. Shinting patted her face. "Any man will think of ruling the world when he's awake and lying on the knees of a beautiful woman when he's drunk." Yi Huan still opened her eyes and looked at him eagerly. "Then you," Shinting smiled. "Uncle Qin gave me a chance to rule the world, but the other one hasn't been realized yet." For some reason, Yi Huan felt that this topic was more dangerous. It was better for her not to answer it. She pursed her lips and bit her teeth, looking a little cute. Shinting touched her hair. "I'll get you a glass of water." "No." She suddenly whispered. "I want to go to the bathroom." In fact, it wasn't that she couldn't go. Shinting wasn't there in the morning, and she could go to the bathroom by herself. It was no problem at all, and she could be discharged tomorrow. But now she just wanted him to hug her. It was no more than a romantic feeling. She just wanted to be spoiled by Shinting like when she was a child. That should feel good. After she finished speaking, Shinting's eyes fell straight on her little face, as if he was a little uncertain. After a while, he said in a hoarse voice, "Okay." He hugged her and felt that she didn't weigh much. These days, He had hugged her a few times, but because of the special circumstances, he didn't feel it carefully. But at this moment, he felt that his hands were very light. So he frowned. You eat all day. Where do you eat all the time? Huan pouted. Nothing, I'm quite meaty. She regretted it the moment she said it. What did she say? Would Enchanting think that she did it on purpose? The expression on Huan's face was very interesting. Enchanting looked at her wrinkled little face and smiled. Yeah, you're quite meaty. The expression on Huan's face was even more interesting. She stared at him and couldn't believe that he was such a Enchanting. Enchanting finally put her down. His voice was slightly hoarse. Call me when you're done. With that said, he walked out like a gentleman. He stood guard outside the bathroom. After a while, he heard Huan meowing like a kitten. Enchanting. He was about to pull the door open when she hurriedly said, Don't come in, don't come in. What's wrong? Enchanting asked in a low voice at the door. Huan couldn't say it out loud. Because her period was here. It wasn't good for her to go out now, and she couldn't stand up. Enchanting didn't hear her say anything and guessed the reason. He smiled silently and lowered his voice. I got it. Wait for a while. Oh, she replied obediently. Enchanting came back in less than 5 minutes and passed the things in through the gap of the door. Huan didn't let him carry it back. She opened the door herself. Her face was a little red, and she didn't have the courage to ask him where he got the sanitary pads. Enchanting just smiled. After she climbed into the bed, he poured her a glass of water and thought for a moment. Cook some red dates. It was good for blood. Huan replied, Oh. It was fine as long as she didn't eat red beans. On this issue, Enchanting obviously didn't have the bad taste of Mo. He knew that she didn't like it, so he kept feeding her red dates and never forced her to eat red beans. In this aspect, he was much better than Mo. While he was cooking, Huan flipped through the book. She felt a little tired and wanted to sleep for a while. After Enchanting finished, he came over and found that she had fallen asleep. His gaze became a little gentle, and he smiled slightly. Then, he went over and pushed her gently. Sleep after eating. I'm done. Huan rubbed her eyes and wanted to get up, but Enchanting pressed her shoulders and said in a slightly low voice, Just sit on the bed. I'll feed you. Ah. Huan was surprised. Her mouth was slightly open, and she looked a little dazed. Enchanting took the opportunity to feed her one. Surprised, Huan had no choice but to eat it. She looked at him while eating. Enchanting was obviously in a very good mood. Why are you looking at me like that? Are you surprised? I used to feed you often. Chapter 48-31. Enchanting took the opportunity to feed her one and Huan had no choice but to eat it in shock. She looked at him as she ate. Enchanting was obviously in a good mood. Why are you looking at me like that? Are you surprised? Didn't I feed you often in the past? She replied naturally, that was in the past. It's different now. I've grown up and besides, she paused for a moment and her voice became soft. I thought you would hate me for a long time because of that. It's been so many years. Isn't that a long time? Enchanting asked. Huan exclaimed. But a few days ago, you were still, with a sour face, wasn't it? He laughed. That's why single people are treated differently. That's because you're someone else's fiancé and you expect me to feed you. That kind of thinking is sinful, Miss Chin. Enchanting teased her. Yi Huan nodded her head deliberately and said, "What you said makes sense. But Shinting, are you really alright?" "Of course." As he fed her, he said casually, "I'm punishing you to go abroad for 2 years to reflect on your mistakes." Ah. This was clearly what she wanted to go. How did it become a punishment? Yi Huan thought about it carefully and suddenly realized that she didn't want to go anymore. It was probably because she was too dependent on him and her life was too good by his side. And Shinting wanted her to go. It was a punishment. She suddenly realized that he was still angry. But she couldn't understand why he was so nice to her even though he was angry. After a while, she scoffed. "Is this a test?" Shinting smiled. "If you want a reason, then that's it." Suddenly, Yi Huan felt that Shinting was quite perverted. He was really tolerant. Yi Huan ate the red dates and felt a little naughty in her heart. She hugged him and acted coquettishly. "You're already 31. I'm going away for 2 years and I'll be 33. If we date for a few more years, I don't know if you can be a father at 40. I'll date for 2 years and get married when I return." Shinting said calmly. Yi Huan's eyes widened in disbelief. "I don't want it. We haven't even gotten to know each other. How can we get married just because you say so?" she said, unconvinced. He put down the bowl in his hand and crossed his arms in front of him. "You and Yi Xiangnan have been together for so many years. It doesn't matter how much time you spend together if you're not compatible. If you're compatible, you can get married within a month. Besides, what else do I not know about you? I was the one who helped you bathe when you were young." Yi Huan was simply speechless. She could not speak for a long time and could only stare at him. Shinting chuckled. "What's wrong? Are you unhappy?" "You're so overbearing," Yi Huan muttered. Actually, it wasn't that she wasn't angry at all. Every girl wanted to be valued and not casually get married. They were very familiar with each other, but they used to get along as a family. How could it be the same? Shinting sighed softly. "You finally know that I'm domineering, but all these years, I've never been domineering to you." Now, after all, he had the right to exercise it. Yi Huan was still glaring at him. Shinting pinched her little face. "I'll try. If I don't try, how will I know that you don't want to marry me? Maybe you'll cry and beg to marry me." Yi Huan made a face at him. "I won't cry and beg to marry someone." Chapter 48-32. Yi Huan made a face at him. "I'm not going to cry and beg to get married." But after saying that, she blushed. It was as if she was the one who had brought up this topic, as if she really wanted to get married. She asked herself if she was with Shinting because she really liked him, or because she wanted to hold on to this driftwood. Was it because she knew that he was the best man she had ever met? It was unlikely that she would meet such a good man in the future, and one who treated her so well. She was a little confused. She was also a little impulsive. Before she figured it out, she wanted to hold on to him and trap herself. But Shinting said that they were going to get married soon. Why was she hesitating? How pretentious. Shinting smiled and didn't say anything. They were developing very quickly now, and he didn't think it would take 2 years. Perhaps they could have a child while she was studying in Italy. Actually, they could get married at any time, and they could have any kind of wedding they wanted. It wasn't that Shinting didn't care about it, but he cared more about living with her. Of course, he couldn't let her know about some of his dark thoughts. He also admitted that he was more despicable than Yi Xiangnan, and he might not be able to tolerate it for long. Shinting was quiet and didn't say anything. Yi Huan looked at his expression and felt that he was a little strange. She sneaked a peek at his face for a long time. Shinting smiled. What's wrong? Yi Huan frowned. You look like you're plotting something. Shinting, do you know that you have this expression when you're scheming against your opponents in the company? Did I? He put away the thoughts in his mind and smiled. It was that gentle Shinting again. But Yi Huan had seen his methods over the years, and she didn't dare to trust him easily. She coughed lightly. I'm going to sleep. Shinting knew that she was really tired, and didn't drag her to talk, even though he wanted to spend time with her. Even though they couldn't do anything, it was still good to talk. He helped her lie down. They had discussed marriage today, so he lowered his head and kissed her. Yi Huan was a little surprised, but she didn't reject him. Instead, he stroked his lips and didn't say anything for a long time. Go to sleep. I'll take you back tomorrow morning. With this injury, you should rest at home for a few days. His voice was very gentle, so gentle that Yi Huan was intoxicated. She had never heard Shinting speak in such a tone. It was as if he was talking to his lover. His heart throbbed a little, but he had to pretend as if nothing had happened. It was a little hard for him. She pursed her lips and made a sound of acknowledgement. However, after a while, she remembered and said, I'm fine. I don't need to rest for a few days. Shinting was quite domineering. Listen to me. His hands pressed down on her shoulders, not allowing her to refuse. Yi Huan wanted to say that her parents didn't control her like this, but she paused. Suddenly, he realized that everything was different. It was because of the change in their relationship that his attitude towards her was different from before. In the past, he would coax, cheat, and pamper her. But now, he treated her like a woman. His identity had also risen from big brother to the role of a man. Yi Huan's face heated up again. Shinting placed his palm on her face. Naturally, he could feel that her face was very hot, so he smiled. What's wrong? Nothing, she said awkwardly and turned her head away. Shinting leaned over and asked in a low voice, really nothing, huh? Chapter 48-33. On the other side, Qin Xian was driving with music playing. It was his favorite singer, Qin Xian, who loved endless loops. At that moment, it started raining again. He turned on the windshield wipers. It happened to be a Friday, and it was also the rush hour. The traffic was jammed, and he didn't know how much Bai Anan had drunk during this time. Seriously, she was an old woman. It was just a breakup. Moreover, he really doubted that she and Shinting had ever started. If they hadn't started, what was there to be disappointed about? It wasn't like all the men in the world had died. But with Bai Anan's personality, it was really troublesome to find a man. Sometimes, it wasn't a good thing for a woman to be too rich or too capable. At least, she had fewer choices when it came to finding a man. Qin Xian put his finger in his mouth and bit it as he drove. He waited for the traffic to clear before driving forward. Just like that, he arrived at Bai Anan's bar at around 9 o'clock. When the bartender showed him the bill, his face was about to turn black. A woman had spent more than 600,000 in a bar, and all the dishes were the most expensive. Qin Xian swiped his card with a dark expression and helped the drunk woman out. Bai Anan was drunk and very restless. She was still throwing a tantrum on his shoulder. Who are you? Are you a gigolo who wants me to buy you? He was a gigolo, and he was very good-looking. Bai Anan pinched his face gently. Not only was he good-looking, but he was also very comfortable. So tender and good-looking. Bai Anan's eyes were a little dazed. She stumbled backward and leaned against a table. I told you, I won't pay. Pay. Qin Xian laughed angrily. What did she think he was? Was he selling his face? He sneered. Lawyer Bai, do you really think highly of me? Are you satisfied with my face? Bai Anan walked forward again and patted his face. About 200. Qin Xian's face darkened and he grabbed her hand. Don't touch. Bai Anan's suit jacket was in her hand. Actually, she had a good figure. Of course, she didn't look bad. How could the child of Yi Mulin and Bai Shuali be bad? Bai Anan tilted her head and stared at Qin Xian. It reminded Qin Xian of two famous sayings, women are 30 and 40. At this time, he also noticed that the men around him had begun to stare at Bai Anan. Her temperament was a little out of place here. It wasn't that she was old-fashioned, but she was born with a noble aura. Noble men were common here, but noble women rarely came to this kind of place. Let's go. Qin Xian snorted. Bai Anan immediately grabbed her bag, held his arm, and walked out. When she was about to get into the car, Qin Xian suddenly thought of something and pressed her head against the car. Do you feel like vomiting? Bai Anan was very drunk. She shook her head. Why do you ask? She touched the smooth lines of the car with her fingers and looked up. Is it very profitable in this industry? A sports car worth more than 10 million. Qin Xian was annoyed and amused. She couldn't recognize him, but she did recognize the car. So he sneered. It's not bad. It adds up. If it's 200, I'll cover you for 5 years. Bai Anan patted his face again. It's good to be the receptionist in my law firm. Chapter 48-34. Her eyes were a little blurred. Rich women will definitely come to me for divorce cases in the future. That's the easiest thing to say. She had inadvertently revealed something. Qin Xian sneered in his heart. It turned out that the righteous lawyer Bai liked divorce cases. Qin Xian ignored her. He opened the car door and stuffed her in. He held the door and bent down. If you dare to vomit on my car, I'll lick it back bit by bit. He said that. Bai Anan covered her mouth and looked at him in horror. 200, what are you so arrogant about? She fished $200 out of her wallet and flung it in his face rather unceremoniously. Qin Xian gritted his teeth. I just helped you pay for a few $100,000. Bai Anan looked straight at him. As a man, is it expensive to buy me a few glasses of wine? Is it expensive? How many glasses of wine? Qin Xian grabbed her hand. Now, get out of the car. I don't want it. Bai Anan hugged her handbag. I paid for it. Qin Xian gritted his teeth. Is this 200 yuan? You said it's 200 yuan. Bai Anan's face looked a little naive. Qin Xian wanted to strangle this old woman. She pretended to be innocent when she was drunk. Was she really drunk or pretending? He was considering whether to pull her out of the car and throw her on the road. However, he gave up in the end. It was raining now. No matter what, he couldn't leave her behind. He walked around the car and got into the car. He felt like he had seen a ghost. He started the car and turned on the music. Where do you live? Bai Anan leaned against the seat. After a while, she seemed to have fallen asleep. She murmured, let's go to your house. Qin Xian's mind was blown. He turned his head. My house. He reached out and shook her not too gently. Bai Anan, are you deliberately taking advantage of me? If you really want a man, I can help you. She did not wake up. She took a pillow out of nowhere and hugged it in her arms. I want you. You're pretty good looking. The conscience of the industry. As he said this, he sighed in satisfaction. Qin Xian frowned and glared at her. And that drunk old woman actually fell asleep just like that. Outside the car, it was dark and raining. His car was filled with the aroma of wine, and there was also the faint scent of a woman's perfume. Qin Xian thought with some disgust, she even knew how to use perfume. He started the car and drove towards the villa where he lived. Qin Xian lived quite far away. It was a full 40-minute drive. As he drove, he would occasionally look at Baianin. She was drunk. She had been making a lot of noise just now, but now she was strangely quiet. At a red light, there was a minute. Qin Xian could not help but look at her sideways. Baianin had fallen asleep with her face tilted to one side. Her fair cheeks were a little flushed, and her hair, which was usually tied up, was now undone. Her silky black hair brushed against her face, and she looked indescribably beautiful. Her side profile was especially well-defined, and her nose was elegant. Her lips were the perfect color even without lipstick. Fragrant and soft. Qin Xian suddenly thought of these words to describe Baianin's appearance. She was beautiful but not seductive. Usually, she would consciously hide it. Now that she was drunk, she had a charm that was not usually seen. However, no matter how charming she was still a 30-year-old woman to Qin Xian. He would not be interested. He turned his gaze away and stepped on the accelerator. About half an hour later, the car arrived at the villa where he lived. Chapter 48-35. The villa was a standalone building, with a total area of more than 600 square meters. Usually, only part-time workers came here because Qin Xian didn't like to be disturbed. The car stopped in the underground garage and turned off the engine. He turned his head to look at Baianin. We're here. Baianin changed her position and continued to sleep. Qin Xian shook her a little rudely. We're here. Do you want to make a call? How old am I? Baianin mumbled and yawned again. We're here. I'm going to sleep. As she said that, she opened the car door shakily and got out of the car shakily. She walked towards the elevator. Qin Xian immediately got out of the car and chased after her. Baianin had already walked to the elevator door. She leaned against the wall and looked at him. Being a gigolo is really rich. This villa looked ordinary, but the interior was different. Just the security system alone cost a few million, and the basement was so exquisite. Baianin felt that she had lived in vain. His style reminded her of a person, Qin Chen. Only a legendary person would be able to spend money like that. Rich families weren't actually that extravagant. They weren't as exaggerated as described in the books, but Qin Chen did. Now, she had met another one, and he was raised by the Qin family, Qin Xian. Baianin suddenly woke up a little. The gigolo was Qin Xian. She couldn't take the 200 yuan, she thought with some pity. Qin Xian also realized that she seemed to be a little more awake. He put his palm over her and brought her into the elevator. Baianin stood in the elevator and wanted to sleep. She rarely drank, but when she drank too much, she wanted to sleep. When she reached the first floor, she kicked off her high heels and threw her handbag on the sofa and jacket as soon as she stepped on the white carpet. She slowly walked up the stairs in her stockings. Her posture was beautiful, her figure was great, and she had to admit that her face was also very beautiful. Qin Xian said hello, but she continued to walk upstairs as if she didn't hear him. Baianin, this is my house. Qin Xian called out again. A strange man's house. Bai Ainan's voice came from upstairs. Qin Xian, you're 2 years younger than me, right? In other words, if there really was something, she wouldn't lose out. This woman. Qin Xian stared upstairs and pulled his tie. She's really thick-skinned. Is she, so casual? Doesn't she care at all? He rolled up his tie and tossed it aside. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of ice water. He raised his head and gulped it down. He was so excited that the ice cube almost slipped down his throat. Qin Xian cursed again. He secretly thought that he should throw Bai Ainan into the hospital where Enchanting and Yi Huan were staying. There was always a price to pay if one wanted to be sweet, right? Qin Xian put down the cup and decided to check on the drunk, old woman upstairs. As he went upstairs, he rolled up the sleeves of his shirt and paused at the door of the guest room. The door was open, but there was no one inside. His heart skipped a beat and his fingers clenched into fists. It can't be what I think it is. He took a few quick steps and opened the door of the master bedroom. Then, he was stunned. In the master bedroom, under the dim yellow light, a woman was lying on the black silk sheets. The scene was very shocking. Qin Xian's Adam's apple bobbed a few times. He walked over slowly and sat by the bed. His fingers were trembling as he placed them on her shoulder. Bai Ainan, this is my bedroom. She buried her face in the pillow of the same color and said weakly, just one night. Don't be too stingy. Chapter 48-36. Qin Xian raised his voice. If I don't sleep here, I won't be able to sleep. Ah. Bai Ainan looked up and stared at him. Then, she gulped and patted the spot beside her. I'll give you half. Qin Xian gritted his teeth. Woman, why are you so thick-skinned? Both parties are consenting and nothing happened, so there won't be any civil disputes. Bai Ainan shouted. Young Master Qin, what are you afraid of? Qin Xian raised his voice. Hey! Are you kidding me? I'm not taking you in to sleep on my bed. Guest room, this is the last time. Bai Ainan occupied the bed. This is also the last time. I'll sleep here. Qin Xian bounced up as if he was scalded. He glared at her and gritted his teeth. Bai Ainan, I'll give you one last chance. Are you sure you want to sleep here? Bai Ainan scoffed. Please close the door for me when you go out. Thank you. Qin Xian walked over and closed the door, but he locked himself in as well. After a while, he took some clothes from the bedroom and opened the bathroom door. Bai Ainan, don't regret it. Don't cry and ask me to take responsibility. Qin Xian took a cold shower. He must have been too angry to take a cold shower. He had never seen such a thick-skinned woman who had to lie in a strange man's bed. Although he knew that she was drunk, if she wasn't evil, why would she have such thoughts? After taking a shower, Qin Xian changed into a black bathrobe. It was also silk. Yes, the only person in the Qin family who had inherited Qin Chen's extravagance was Qin Xian. The place he lived in was filled with luxury goods and each of them was priceless. He didn't think that it was bad. He liked this kind of life and it was more inclined towards the dark side. As for Bai Ainan, she wasn't the dark side at all. She was evil, and she was obviously evil, and her surname was Bai. Qin Xian wiped his hair and glared at Bai Ainan. In the end, he went to sleep on the sofa. Of course, he couldn't sleep. He only cared about his bed. Every sheet on his bed was made of silk, and so were his pajamas. He would not have been able to sleep otherwise. Of course, Bai Anan did not know that he was doing this. She slept comfortably on his 2-meter bed. Bai Anan was very obedient after she was drunk. This was what Qin Xian suddenly thought of at 3:00 at night. Although he couldn't sleep, it was much better than taking care of a drunkard. With that thought in mind, he felt much better. He lay down and took out his phone to play the company's new game. Yes, in addition to new energy sources, he could also develop some games, airlines, and high-speed rail. Qin Xian was almost omnipotent and a genius. Of course, geniuses would also be lonely. They had no one they loved. Other than their family, there was no one else. Qin Xian slowly sat up at night. He often woke up at night and couldn't sleep after waking up. He sat until daybreak. Therefore, he liked to sleep with the lights on. He didn't like to wake up at night. That feeling was terrible. Just as he gave up and sat up, a voice came from the other side. Qin Xian, I'm hungry. I want to eat hot pot. Qin Xian frowned and slowly turned his head to look at the old woman on the bed. He gritted his teeth. Bai Anan, don't you think you're asking for too much? Too much. Bai Anan grabbed her hair. I don't think so. Aren't you taking care of me? Eating hot pot in the middle of the night. Bai Anan, you're not pregnant. Qin Xian let out a long sigh. Only pregnant women would be so unreasonable. Really? Bai Anan opened her eyes. Pregnant women can be like this. He didn't say anything. Was that the point? Bai Anan thought that he had tacitly agreed and nodded. Then I'll be pregnant. Ah. Qin Xian was shocked. Bai Anan smiled. Artificial insemination. Have you donated before? Qin Xian was speechless. She really thought that he would serve her. And in such a way. He gritted his teeth. If I want a child, there's only one way. As he ate with his fork, he continued to stare at the TV, completely ignoring his pretty face. Qin Xian gnashed his teeth. Are you also so casual in other men's homes? Oh, I'll do as the host pleases. Bai Anan stretched and looked at him strangely. You're not happy. If you're not happy, I'll go to someone else's house next time and improve it. After all, it's most important that everyone is happy. You still want to go to another man's house? Qin Xian sneered. Aren't you afraid that someone will eat you up? Bai Anan was not too bothered. I happen to have a child. Didn't you say that there's something wrong with me? Qin Xian was exasperated. What kind of woman are you? You're so thick-skinned. Bai Anan smiled. I adapt to the situation. Just like Enchanting. She clapped her hands. Actually, I'm not that sad. But isn't the normal procedure of a breakup supposed to be drinking? It's a ritual. Chapter 48-38. Qin Xian's face darkened. Are you going to drown your sorrows or celebrate? Both. Bai Anan didn't avoid it. Qin Xian sneered. But you can't let others pay for your sense of ceremony. Bai Anan looked surprised. Ah. I don't think I called you, President Qin. You were the one who forced me out of the bar. You're lucky that I didn't sue you for attempted rape. Qin Xian really wanted to put the hot pot on her head and see if she could still say something like that. He was really pissed off. How could there be such a thick-skinned woman in this world? She looked so, not bad. She was so thick-skinned and had a venomous tongue. She was really, the type that he disliked and admired the most. Qin Xian didn't say a word. He walked straight back to the kitchen and continued to prepare the hot pot. Anyway, this was the last time. He would send her off tomorrow morning and never see her again. He wouldn't have to put up with strange old women anymore. He didn't say a word. He kept a straight face until it was time to eat. Bai Anan was in a good mood and had a good appetite. Qin Xian really wondered why she was so thin when she could eat so much. Actually, it wasn't that she was thin. It was just that he felt that she was fat, but he didn't feel that it was enough. Her figure. Qin Xian's Adam's apple moved quietly again. The reason why Bai Anan ate so happily was because Qin Xian's cooking was very good. The kind that could make the tip of the tongue pregnant. She had always liked to eat hot pot, and his cooking was not bad. It was only more hygienic. After eating for half an hour, she was finally full. She finally leaned against the back of the chair and looked at Qin Xian. "You eat so little." Qin Xian quietly packed up the things. "I don't have the habit of eating supper." "That's good. You keep your figure." Bai Anan grinned. "After all, you have such a weird temper. If you don't have a good-looking face and a barely presentable body, you'll probably be a bachelor in the future." Qin Xian looked up at her. "Unfortunately, I also think the same way. So, you should quit eating supper in the future. Otherwise, you probably won't be able to get married." "It doesn't matter." Bai Anan wasn't angry. She smiled. "It's good that you have a job." "Who said that you have to get married?" Qin Xian was surprised. He then added, "You're looking for excuses." "Why are you looking for excuses?" Bai Anan snorted. "I never settle for second best. That's not my style." Qin Xian stared at her for a moment before packing up his things. "I'm going to the study." "Bai Anan, you can stay here and watch TV or go to bed. It's up to you." Bai Anan stretched herself and said, "All right, I'm going to bed." "Thank you, President Qin." She had said something sensible. Qin Xian watched her go upstairs as if she was at her own home. He couldn't help but say, "Lawyer Bai, your alcohol tolerance is actually quite good." Bai Anan paused for a moment. She held the stairs and smiled. "It's from practice. You know that alcohol is needed everywhere. I won't throw up after drinking too much." Qin Xian was surprised and didn't say anything for a moment. To be honest, neither he nor Yi Huan had the experience of drinking with others. He was in the field of technology. There were many people who begged him. Moreover, he had the Qin family behind him and Enchanting behind him. Needless to say, there was no need to mention Yi Huan. In this generation of the Qin family, the one who needed to drink was Enchanting. Enchanting was a huge drinker. Perhaps this drinking capacity was also obtained from drinking. Bai Anan was the chosen one. Did she need to drink with others until she vomited? Chapter 48-39. Looking at his gaze, Bai Anan smiled and shook her hand gently. "Isn't that normal?" With that said, she walked back to the master bedroom. Qin Xian felt that she was so sure that he wouldn't do anything. This woman really knew how to judge people. She was really too hateful. Qin Xian went to the study and worked for the whole night. He stayed up until 8 in the morning. He felt that as a strong woman, even if she had a hangover, she would still get up early in the morning. But when he pushed open the door to the master bedroom, Bai Anan was sleeping soundly, hugging his pillow in her hands. Those who didn't know better would think that this was her home and that this was her bed. Besides, she didn't even close the door. Did she really think that he was safe? Qin Xian went over and reached out to push her. Bai Anan, you should get up. Don't stay in my bed anymore. He didn't hide his disdain at all. Bai Anan slapped his hand away. It's the weekend. So. He gritted his teeth. Bai Anan turned around and looked at him. We only ate half of the hot pot last night. We can make do for lunch. She meant that she wanted to stay here for half a day, Qin Xian sneered. Why don't you say that I'll cook for dinner? Bai Anan actually said shamelessly, that's fine too. I'll get my secretary to send my laptop over in the afternoon. I can work here too. Bai Anan. Qin Xian finally couldn't take it anymore. Didn't you say that it's the weekend? Yes, so I'm not going to the office. Is there a problem? She pretended to be innocent and pure, but the word shameless was written all over her. Qin Xian felt that the argument he had with a lawyer, the most famous lawyer in the industry, was like a scholar meeting a soldier. How did she become a lawyer? She might be more professional if she was a gangster. He gritted his teeth. You're relying on me now, aren't you? I'll leave tomorrow. I have a 2:00 flight to Switzerland tomorrow afternoon, she said indifferently. It seemed very light, but for Qin Xian, it was a very tempting condition. Bear with it a little longer and she would be gone. Moreover, when she went abroad, he wouldn't contact her anymore and wouldn't take the initiative to provoke her. She wouldn't have to bear with it anymore. Qin Xian endured it. Ask your secretary to bring your clothes over. Don't wear men's clothes all the time in my house. It's very ugly. You can't hold back anymore. Bai Anan smiled. Do you want me to make a call for you and book a hotel room? I can afford 10 or 20,000 yuan, but you have to come back before dinner. 8:00 at the latest. Otherwise, I will starve to death. Bai Anan. He clenched his fists. What kind of woman are you? A lawyer. She did not get angry and smiled. Now be a good boy and go make breakfast. I will sleep for a while after eating. After saying that, she buried herself in the quilt again, treating it as her own bed. Qin Xian walked out and called Shinting at the door. Now, he wanted Shinting to get rid of this woman. He couldn't hold it in any longer. But no one picked up Shinting's call. Qin Xian froze for a moment before understanding. Fuck, it's so early in the morning. And so fast. Shinting was really fast. He let out a long breath. Thinking of Bai Anan, he was actually a little surprised. With Bai Anan's wealth, if she dressed like this in front of Shinting and deliberately went to his apartment, Shinting wouldn't be able to resist. Men would feel lonely too. After all, Yi Huan had been with Yi Xiangnan all those years. But, he didn't understand. How could a woman like Bai Anan be so proud? Kong, she was so bold in front of him. Happy Mid-Autumn. Chapter 48-40. Qin Xian hung up the phone and went downstairs angrily. He sat on the sofa downstairs and couldn't understand why Bai Anan would stick to him. He rubbed his chin gently with his thumb and finally fell asleep on the sofa. He woke up because Bai Anan's secretary had come over. This woman was really planning to work at his house. Bai Anan's secretary looked sweet and actually resembled Yi Hui. Qin Xian took a few more glances at her and then asked her to wait downstairs while he went upstairs to call Bai Anan. Bai Anan could sleep in his bedroom and climb into his bed, but that didn't mean that Qin Xian liked others to watch in his bedroom. He walked slowly up the stairs. When he reached the corner of the staircase, he paused. But he still knocked on the master bedroom door. The The door opened and Bai Anan was still wearing his bathrobe. She went back to the sofa and played with her phone. She lowered her head and her black hair covered her eyes. What's the matter? Lawyer Bai, I'm not your subordinate. Qin Xian crossed his arms in front of him. Bai Anan nodded. I know. What's wrong? Your secretary is downstairs. Qin Xian's voice was cold. Go downstairs immediately. I don't like strangers at home. Bai Anan finally put down the phone in her hand. Yaren. I thought you would be happy. She's the prettiest girl in my law firm. Really? Qin Xian didn't seem moved. Bai Anan curled her lips. I thought you would like girls like Yi Hui, so I specially asked Yaren to come over to deliver something. After she said that, Qin Xian's expression didn't look too good because she had hit the nail on the head. Although he wasn't particularly moved, he still had some feelings for her. He didn't expect Bai Anan to be able to see through it. After all, they had only been together once or twice, and she even said it out loud. I don't think so. Qin Xian's voice was cold. Go downstairs. Bai Anan glanced at him and felt that he was being a little strange. She walked out slowly, and as she fastened her belt, she said with some uneasiness, By the way, President Qin, you should find a girlfriend now that you're getting older. Otherwise, you'll seem a little weird when you're so hot-tempered. Qin Xian's face darkened again. Bai Anan smiled and finally went downstairs. She acted as though this was her home. As she walked down the stairs, her secretary, Yaren, stared at her superior and boss, stuttering, Lawyer Bai, is this your boyfriend? Without waiting for her to speak, Secretary Ye whispered again, very handsome. Moreover, it looked like he was really rich. The decoration here was very tasteful, and the smell of money was everywhere. A pretty boy. Bai Anan didn't think much of it and said, what a bad temper. She sat on the sofa and took stock of her belongings. Secretary Ye looked at the men's bathrobe she was wearing. God, Lawyer Bai looked really good in it, and it looked like a wife wearing her husband's pajamas. How should she put it? It felt like it was a good match. Lawyer Bai had always been very good-looking. She was also an elite in the industry and had high standards. Now that she finally had a man she liked, Secretary Ye felt that this pretty boy was more suitable for Lawyer Bai than President Shin. President Shin looked like an elite like Lawyer Bai. Wouldn't it be especially boring for two people of the same type to live together? Chapter 48-41. This pretty boy was different. He had a pretty face, and he seemed to be more exquisite and good-looking than a woman. His figure was also very good, and his black trousers made his legs look very, very long. Secretary Ye sighed in her heart. What a masterpiece! That Lawyer Bai must have been very happy these 2 days. Bai Anan flipped through a file and read it carefully. How could she know that her secretary had already thought so much in the blink of an eye? She only read for a minute before letting Yaren go back. After Yaren left, Bai Anan didn't go upstairs immediately. She sat on the sofa and read the file. Qin Xian came down from upstairs and saw her fascinated look. He walked behind her and flicked her hair with his finger. Change your clothes. Didn't you bring clothes over? What if someone comes over dressed like this in my house? Who would come over if you lived alone? At most, Auntie Zhong Dian would come over, and it wouldn't be strange, unless you brought someone of a different gender back before. That would be strange. Bai Anan's gaze fell on the file as she spoke. Her fingers curled as if she was going to grab a mug, but her hand was empty, so she said naturally, Go pour me a cup of coffee. She had just finished speaking when she remembered that this wasn't her office, so she looked up and smiled at Qin Xian. "Young Master Qin, can you help me pour a cup of coffee?" Qin Xian rolled his eyes. "Bai Anan, can you be any more thick-skinned?" Bai Anan was still all smiles. Qin Xian glared at her again, but still went to the kitchen. Bai Anan immediately looked at the file in her hand again. This case was quite tricky, so she was a little engrossed in it. At that moment, a soft voice came from beside her. She thought that Qin Xian had returned. "Coffee." But the voice was very soft and gentle. "Anan." Hearing this voice, Bai Anan was scared out of her wits. She slowly looked up, as expected, it was He Huan. She was Qin Mo's wife, Qin Xian's aunt, and Qin Xian's mother. The two families had dealings, especially with Xiangnan, so it was absolutely impossible for Bai Anan to pretend that she didn't know him. She squeezed out a smile and immediately jumped up. She reached out to pull her pajamas and explained helplessly, this is definitely a misunderstanding." He Huan was in a very good mood. Enchanting and Yi Huan were together. She had thought that Qin Xian was a big problem, but Qin Xian was really unexpected. He brought the girl back, and she was wearing his pajamas. What else was there to say? He moved swiftly. He Huan was very satisfied. Bai Anan's appearance was flawless, and her family background was clean. Yes, she was very good. In fact, she was a social climber. There were signs of Enchanting and Bai Anan in the past, but as an aunt, she could tell that Enchanting's heart had always been with Yi Huan. So, the two of them wouldn't do anything out of line. Enchanting also stayed at home every day. But now that he was with Yi Huan, he was living outside. Yi Huan was an experienced person, so it was easy for her to understand. But she really didn't expect that Qin Xian would act so quickly and get together with Bai Anan. Her face was full of interest. Bai Anan hated herself to death. Wasn't she just greedy for 2 meals from a pretty boy? Did she have to get herself involved like this? Now, she couldn't clear her name even if she jumped into the Yellow River. She scratched her head and tried her best to convince He Huan. "Aunt, Qin Xian and I was drunk. Qin Xian brought me back." Chapter 48-42. I know. It's not safe for girls to stay outside, and the hotel is not hygienic. It's good for Qin Xian to live alone. He Huan didn't answer her question. Bai Anan's heart sank. It's over. At this moment, Qin Xian walked over with a tray in his hand. Apart from coffee, there was also a sandwich he made for breakfast. This was undoubtedly the truth. Pajamas, breakfast in the morning. What else was there to say? Bai Anan felt a headache coming on. She looked at Qin Xian speechlessly. In fact, Qin Xian had heard the sound just now and knew it was He Huan. He wasn't surprised. He put the tray on the table and looked at Bai Anan. "Sit down and have breakfast." Bai Anan was too embarrassed to read documents and eat breakfast at the same time. She could have used his house as her office, but she didn't have the face to do so in front of the elders. She coughed lightly. "I'll go upstairs to change." "It's not too late to change after breakfast." He Huan held her hand and said intimately, "Let's go to the dining table. Sitting here all the time will affect your fertility." Fertility. Bai Anan was speechless. With whom?" He Huan smiled. "Other than Qin Xian, there was only one male here, and the pajamas you were wearing belonged to Qin Xian. Who else could you have a baby with?" Bai Anan felt that she had to make things clear, so she coughed lightly. Auntie, it's really a misunderstanding. There's nothing going on between me and Qin Xian. It's just a coincidence. After saying that, she carefully looked at He Huan's expression. He Huan seemed to be very interested in it. Bai Anan cursed Shanine in her heart, what's the point of explaining? She squeezed out a smile. Auntie, you won't tell my parents, will you? He Huan looked embarrassed. Anan, I think Qin Xian still has to give an explanation for this matter. After all, it's already happened. Bai Anan almost spat out the coffee in her mouth. She hurriedly swallowed it. Wait, nothing happened between us. He Huan stared at her clothes. Bai Anan glanced at Qin Xian. He Huan patted Qin Xian's shoulder. What do you say? Don't tell me you don't want to take responsibility. Bai Anan was relieved. Qin Xian would definitely deny it. But she didn't expect Qin Xian to nod. Of course I will. After saying that, he smiled at her. That smile made Bai Anan's hair stand on end. If it weren't for the fact that her elders were here, she would have jumped up and started fighting with Qin Xian. He was really, really bad. He Huan said cheerfully, that's settled then. I'll discuss it with your Uncle Qin. After all, this is a matter between two families. We can't be careless. You're not young anymore. Don't learn from young people and fall in love for several years. It's the same after marriage. Qin Xian nodded in agreement, Auntie is right. Bai Anan stopped talking. She bent over and ate her breakfast obediently. He Huan didn't stay long and left quickly. Before leaving, she even gave Bai Anan a gift. Bai Anan's face was sore from smiling before she saw her off. When only the two of them were left, Bai Anan glared at Qin Xian. You did it on purpose. Yes, it was on purpose. Qin Xian leaned next to her and actually picked up the coffee cup she had drunk from and took a sip. It tasted good. Bai Anan glared at him. You did it on purpose. Do you think I can't do anything about it? Chapter 48-43. Qin Xian sighed. My auntie isn't stupid. She's just joking and won't take it seriously. Joking? Won't take it seriously. Bai Anan raised an imperial green pendant in her hand. Young Master Qin, is this what you mean by not taking it seriously and joking? Qin Xian merely smiled and did not say anything else. Not taking it seriously and joking was what he thought in his heart. Indeed, he did not take it seriously. He was not that averse to marriage, but he had never thought of marrying a girl like Bai Anan. How should he put it? She was too domineering, just like Shanting, and he was more casual. He was surprised that he was really considering whether they should be together and whether their personalities were compatible. After a moment of shock, he smiled faintly. Bai Anan glared at him. When she saw him smile, her heart skipped a beat. Even though this gigolo was annoying, he was quite good-looking. He did not usually smile, but he looked good when he did. Perhaps sensing her gaze, Qin Xian looked up with a faint smile. Bai Anan, don't worry. I don't have any improper thoughts about you. Thank you. She harumphed and took a cup of coffee to hide it. She did not notice that it was a cup of coffee that Qin Xian had drunk from. She lowered her head quietly. On the other hand, Qin Xian's gaze landed on her. After staring for a while, he said softly, I'll send you back later. Jokes aside, he did not want to get involved with her. Bai Anan did not reject him, but she felt a little upset when she left. She seemed to have been despised by someone. Ever since she was young, she had always been outstanding and had never been despised by anyone. Enchanting did not have feelings for her, and they still respected each other. However, Enchanting's attitude was clearly that he did not like her and despised her. Enchanting sat in the car and waited for the car to arrive at her apartment. When she got out of the car, she turned her head. Enchanting, am I particularly annoying? Am I still a workaholic at such an old age? Enchanting said nothing. Enchanting knew. She gently bit her lower lip and didn't ask any more. She reached out to open the car door and got out. When she got out, she paused for a moment and bent down. Thank you. I don't feel that bad anymore. Enchanting's fingers twitched. As long as you don't feel uncomfortable. After she closed the door, his car drove away. Enchanting stood there and watched his car drive away. She suddenly felt that Enchanting was an animal that was isolated from his emotions. She had discovered that he had feelings for Yi Hui in the past, and she had thought that he would pursue her. However, he did not even after 2 or 3 years. The night Fictional was very beautiful. If Enchanting didn't fall for such a woman, Enchanting would think that Enchanting probably didn't like women anymore. Was that why Heartwarming was so anxious? She smiled again. Her intuition told her that wasn't the case. Enchanting just didn't like to share his inner world with someone else. At this thought, Enchanting shook her head. It's an occupational hazard. She quickly stepped into the elevator. Of course, she left the meeting gift with Enchanting. Enchanting would explain it to Heartwarming. Enchanting had thought that after this, she wouldn't be able to see Enchanting easily. After all, she was no longer working at King Corporation, so it was unlikely that she would see him. However, she had just returned from London when she unexpectedly bumped into Enchanting. It was Enchanting's matchmaking banquet. Enchanting was wearing a full set of clothes. Just as she was about to enter her private room, she saw Enchanting walking over from the other side. There were a few elders beside him. This lineup couldn't be any more obvious. There was nothing else other than a matchmaking banquet. Chapter 48-44. Enchanting was talking about business. Other than her suit, she was carrying a briefcase in her hand. Secretary Ye was beside her. As he walked, his footsteps came to a halt. She met Enchanting face to face. She knew Mo and Heartwarming, but she didn't know the other 2 elders. They might be the girl's parents. No matter what kind of misunderstanding there was before, Enchanting still politely greeted them and made way for them. Secretary Ye saw this and also turned to the side, but she was a little hesitant. Wasn't this the pretty boy that lawyer stayed at last night? He looked like he was going on a blind date. He looked especially energetic and neat today. He looked a little different. Secretary Ye whispered, "This is a blind date. Lawyer Bai, are you going to let him go just like that?" Enchanting also lowered her voice. Nothing happened. However, Secretary Ye didn't believe such an explanation. She only looked at her boss suspiciously. Enchanting couldn't care less about her and smiled politely at Heartwarming. Heartwarming felt that it was a pity. She quite liked Enchanting. Although she was 2 years older than Enchanting, she had a calm personality. Enchanting was the child of Yi Mulin and Bai Shuali. She was very good-looking, but her personality was like Yi Mulin. She didn't have a trace of Bai Shuali's naivety. It was a good match for Enchanting. She also made the best of a mistake that day. She didn't expect both children to have no intention. One denied it directly, and the other hid abroad for a few days before returning. Heartwarming sighed in her heart, but she couldn't show it in front of the girl's parents. She just smiled like an elder. Anan, come visit us when you're free. Yi Huan likes to be with you. Qin Yi Huan. Mrs. Qin must be joking. Bai Anan didn't expose her. She smiled. Okay, Auntie He. I'll definitely go when I'm free. By the way, when are they getting married? He Huan sighed. Yi Huan is going abroad for 2 years. She said she's going to learn photography. She's going to Milan. Shinting also let her go. Bai Anan smiled and did not say anything else. She knew very well that in the next 2 years, King Group's business focus would be overseas. That was why Shinting was willing to let it go. But from what she could see, they would be killing people soon. It was the same no matter where it was. Bai Anan was a little absent-minded. When she returned to her senses, her gaze inadvertently landed on Qin Xian's eyes. His gaze was a little judgmental. Bai Anan didn't really like this kind of gaze. It was as if all her thoughts were exposed to his gaze. Hence, the corners of her lips curled up. Uncle, Auntie, I'll go over then. The client is still waiting for me. Just as she was about to leave, He Huan suddenly stopped her. Girls shouldn't drink too much. Bai Anan stopped in her tracks as if she was a little surprised. She forgot to control her expression. A few seconds later, she found her voice again. Secretary Ye can drive. Don't worry, Auntie. The subtext of her words was that she had to drink. Because today's client was a drinker. He was also a little rough, but because of Bai Anan's family background, he didn't dare to do anything. But Bai Anan still had to drink a few glasses of wine. If she had to lie beside her father, she wouldn't have gotten to where she was today. Of course, the other clients didn't have this kind of face. This was the biggest client in the firm apart from King Group. And now, it was the biggest. Accompanying him for a drink or two was nothing. Even if she had to send Secretary out, she would have to consider it. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.